Welcome to Talent Agnostic, Gigstart's weekly podcast where we bring together experts from across the tech market to discuss best practices on how to scale your startup. I'm Finbar Dalton, and today I'm joined by Karla Geci, former Director of International Partner Marketing at Meta. So to get things started, Karla, could you just introduce yourself and give us an insight into your career today?
Sure. Thanks, Finbar, for having me. I'm a B2B marketer, also a B2B to C marketer, have been for over 2 decades. Also worked in the partnership space. And really, I feel like my sweet spot in my career is where partnerships and marketing kind of meet. I've been in tech since the early 2000s. It's also where my passion is, my interests. Having had the great opportunity to be at the start of some really new waves in technological advancements and adoption by businesses and consumers. Um, and yeah, here we are today.
Sure. No, good stuff. So yeah, obviously you've been in marketing for some time now. What was it that sort of initially motivated you to get into the space?
Well, I was studying business at university, but I wasn't sure what aspect I wanted to focus on. And I remember taking an introduction to marketing class where the professor boldly said, there are no new ideas. And now probably he was intentionally being provocative, to spark some discussion, but whatever his intention was, that really lit a fire in me. And, you know, uh, my 19-year-old self, wanted to see if that could be debunked, if there really were no new ideas out there. And then later, I landed an internship with Ernst and Young, which might sound unusual for a marketer, but I was working on their Entrepreneur of the Year program, and that really cemented it for me. It's kind of again where like tech and entrepreneurship and marketing meet, and it was really exciting to me. So, that's kind of what led me down my path, and it's the advice I always give to young people, which is to get as much work experience as you can early on. The theory and the studying is so important, but so much of what I learned as a marketer was on the job. Frankly, we weren't really even talking, we certainly weren't talking about social media marketing when I was a student. So that work experience is so critical, and it helped me figure out what I wanted to do with my career.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I always think that young people should get as much work experience in different areas of business as possible, just to see what really strikes their interest really, and where they think they could be, most best fit in. Um,
Yeah. It's
I
it's
get
hard now, because I know a lot of gigs are unpaid, and that's hard for young people. But I think even a couple of weeks, 2 weeks in the environment, in the context, can really help you make that next kind of move, that next decision. So yeah, I think it's still really sound advice.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And so I guess you've worked in a number of different sort of startup environments. Um, obviously you've spent the last significant portion of your career at sort of Facebook and Meta, which obviously we wouldn't typically consider as a startup. But I know that you joined sort of Facebook as one of their sort of first employees in EMEA. What was that experience like?
I mean, to say it was an exciting time would probably be a massive understatement. It was, a new sector was literally emerging. And you're right. When I joined the business, it was really past the startup phase, but it was really about scaling up. I think my recollection is that we were maybe around 2,000 employees worldwide, which now looks small. But funny enough, at the time, I actually thought was a really big. I thought I was joining a big business. I had come from a smaller startup. But what I really remember at the time is that it wasn't smooth sailing, even though um, people were flocking to the platform, and it was certainly growing. And we had incredible ambitions around how to you know, drive revenue and connect more people around the world. But really, senior executives outside the business, in my experience, still viewed social media as a potential flash in the pan. They were far from convinced, and it was incredibly hard work to influence the C-suite that they should be spending their advertising dollars, that they should be putting their content on Facebook. So as a marketer, I always go back to, I did this back then and I still today go back to what's the RTB, right? What's the reason to believe? And for those not familiar, that's just defined very simply as, what's the compelling proof that the brand can deliver on its promises? And for us at that time, that meant we really had to have accurate and timely data. And it had to be woven throughout our storytelling. And then that combined with mapping everything back to our mission, which the company has evolved its mission, but at the time you might remember, and most media publications could recite it blindly, and that shows that you've done your job as a marketer, right? It was to give people the power to share and make the world more open and connected. And again, while that's evolved, at the time it was really, really critical. So those were two, really big tools in my kit that I leveraged, tying everything back to the mission, but then really leveraging data to help tell that story and to make the RTB real, the reason to believe, right? If you were an advertiser or brand, because that's who we were working with. I was a B2B marketer, right? I was trying to encourage big media companies to share their content and to create a presence when pages were new on Facebook. That was a new product that we had launched, and to put their content there and to trust in the potential of the advertising and the reach.
No, that's really interesting. I've not come across RTB before, or that sort of specific acronym. Often I always think about it sort of from, what's in it for me from like the client's perspective, but
Mhm.
I guess RTB is similar to that. I guess, I mean, you've had quite a lot of experience when it comes to sort of marketing first of their kind technologies. I know that when you were starting out your career at Real Networks, that was one of the first sort of streaming platforms at the time.
Mhm.
Um, do you have any other best practices that maybe sort of startups could consider when they're looking to sort of position first of their kind technologies, and maybe look to sort of cross the chasm as it may when it comes to sort of getting those early adopters
Mm.
persuaded on their solution?
Well, again, speaking from experience and yeah, just taking a step back, because people might not remember the name Real Networks, but they very well might remember the Real Player, which was really one of the early uh, streaming audio and video players on the web. I mean, the founder of that company really created that sector. Actually, owns the patent on streaming audio on the web. So it was again a really wild time and a really nascent space. And so I was marketing internet streaming software, which sounds incredibly sexy and compelling, but actually it was really going to fundamentally change the way we use the internet. But I was trying to market that to major media organizations, and this was way before cord cutting was actually a thing. I mean, people were talking about it, but it wasn't a thing. And in fact, the idea that people would eventually be habitually watching long form content on small screens was absolutely the debate du jour. So it was a really tough proposition because we lacked the evidence. We were really talking about a future state, right? We were saying people are going to be doing X, and our founder was really a visionary, um, uh, you know, who believed that that was going to be true, and in fact, it was. But we lacked that evidence, and I'll tell you, I still have PTSD from the constant buffering during live demos. I mean, I wake up in the middle of the night because we used to do these live demos. We'd show the streaming, in action, but it was always buffering. It was terrible. It was terrible, Finbar. But it was during this period that I first learned about the power of a proof of concept, right? Proof of concept. Wow. I had never seen this in practice. I'd never actually worked through it. And that's when the business really started to become a consumer facing business, because we were selling, like I said, streaming software to media companies, but we needed this proof of concept. So we launched a kind of first of its kind direct to consumer digital subscription service. And don't blame marketing, but it was called Superpass, and it allowed paid subscribers to watch. Now, wait for it, Finbar, Big Brother 24/7, and it was streaming direct to your small screen. And this, as a marketer, this proof of concept was something I just took and ran with, and it really it became my number one RTB. This was the reason to believe, because that was the evidence that marketing needed to really demonstrate the trend that was happening, right? And it really changed how we told our story to customers. And I think that's true today. Any startup, that's sometimes struggling with, especially when you have a visionary founder, you need that proof of concept, and marketing can really take that and build an incredible strategy around that. So that's my 2 cents there.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I agree. I mean, I think that the proof of concept can be really, really powerful. Often I come across like technical founders who sometimes speak too much to the technical functionality of a product, or get too stuck in the weeds of all of the sort of features of the product, instead of being able to sort of really emphasize the benefits and how it actually adds value to their clients. So I think, the proof of concept can be really valuable there to just show people in action exactly how their problems can be solved.
Oh,
Um,
it was a game changer there, and it was challenging because the company was not a consumer business. That's kind of the takeaway point, but really, in a lot of ways, became one, and later on, really developed into a lot more consumer facing products and services. But that was kind of incredible. But it's a leap of faith that that turned out to be effective. So.
sure. No, that makes sense. So I guess, I mean, most recently a big part of your career has been focused on sort of partnerships. um, Partnerships of all kinds, from sort of, as you mentioned, partnerships with media companies, but all the way through down to sort of individual influencers as well. What are some of the ways that sort of startups can get started with partnerships, and where would you advise that they really sort of focus on in the early days?
Well, and maybe I am biased, so I'll caveat that, because you're right. I've spent a lot of my recent career working with the creator community, and influencer marketing is certainly not a new concept by any stretch, at all. But the marketing strategy, in terms of how it's leveraged, how it's incorporated into the marketing mix, that has really evolved significantly in recent years, in light of the kind of massive growth of what we now refer to as the creator economy.
Mm,
So now those two terms, influencer marketing and creator marketing, are used interchangeably, but they're really quite different. And creator marketing is a lot more nuanced, and is, to me, where a lot of the opportunity is for whether you're you know a Fortune 500 or you're a small startup. And there's a couple of reasons why. I mean, creators today shape public opinion. Now, arguably, influencers do too, but creators are much more closely linked to culture, and creating culture, and they want to work with brands and on projects that they are passionate about, and give them a sense of meaning and purpose. And this is evidenced, in the data. This is much more in the mindset. We did a lot of research at Meta, and there's a lot of available research. I always turn to something called the Influencer Marketing Hub, which has lots of great data and reports in this space. But this is, it's not about, for creators, it's not necessarily about the brand who's going to write them the biggest check, right? They really want to work with those brands that align kind of with their values. So that's already an opportunity for a startup, because this is a space you wouldn't even be able to consider, because you probably would have had to eat up your whole marketing budget, to get a celebrity, right, to endorse your brand, which is really what influencer marketing is. And content creators, they have the ability to reach these niche and very specific audiences, kind of the opposite of the old days of spray and pray,
mm,
nightmare for marketers. But that's was a common practice. Um, these creators have developed, these communities and followings around specific interests and specific demographics, and niches. And this is great for startups who want to run some, I think, highly targeted kind of test and learn campaigns that with the audience that they're trying to reach, or just to even help them better understand their audience, right, which is new. So I think those are opportunities that exist now for startups with the rise of this creator economy that would have just not been open to them. Like I said, in the past, where you had to write a big check to a celebrity, frankly, to endorse your brand.
Sure. No, that's interesting. I've not really thought about it like that. I mean, so what you're saying is that the difference between a creator and an influencer is that a creator is more focused, sort of more mission driven, behind a particular cause, whereas an influencer is more of a sort of traditional celebrity that is obviously just trying to, make as much money off as possible off their sort of of their network.
Yeah,
Um, I guess.
that's that. Yeah, it's just to add to that, Finbar, is that's right. A lot of creators you've never heard of,
Mm,
and that's that's actually quite powerful because a startup that invests the time to understand, first of all, where their audience is on social media, and then identifying those creators who really represent that audience and are effectively building community. That's an opportunity, an authentic opportunity, right? To have them talking about your brand. So it involves, to me, a more upfront work. It's not just about kind of bringing an agency and saying, book me Beyonce, and here's the big check. Um, but it's a lot more about learning about your audience, which again is any marketer would give that advice to a startup, understanding that first, and then building that relationship, even, and really even co-creating a campaign, which puts it puts people off because it's an investment of time. But I think the outcomes we've seen can really pay off for brands, because they're reaching, a lot of times, very hard to reach audiences and people, and they're having way better outcomes, and frankly even better ROI. So we see that in the data too. So the money talks.
sure. No, I guess in your position, you were mainly working, within influencer marketing, within um, sort of Instagram. Is that right? Within the Face Meta portfolio.
Yes, creator marketing, Finbar. We always refer, because we were really working with
Sure.
the
Yeah.
the vast and vibrant creator community, both on Instagram and Facebook, and it was a completely new space, really.
Sure. And I guess within that business, it's kind of sort of a B to B to C business, if that makes sense, right?
Right.
Because would you
Mhm.
say that there's a particular business model where sort of creator marketing is particularly effective, or do you think it really crosses all types of businesses from the B to Cs to the B to Bs, really?
Oh, I mean, I think it crosses all. I literally just saw, a financial services company. I'm going to send you the name, Finbar. Really using Reels, which is a relatively new format, on Instagram, to reach their audiences. It's really not exclusive to one sector. I think certainly we can envisage how direct to consumer brands leverage creators. But the incredible thing about this creator economy is that they are they're covering all sectors. I mean, there's young creators. I follow a young creator who gives great financial advice. He's talking to his audience about living trusts, and he's telling young people, don't let your parents give you their house, because you're going to pay tax on it. And he can't be more than 23. So this is really, now you're into the world of kind of financial services, financial advice. So no, I don't think. I just think, again, it takes that time to do the research and to really understand which creator is going to map best to your brand and to your brand goals and objectives.
Sure. No, that makes sense. Um, I guess, I mean, in your experience, obviously at Meta, you've had the chance to work on some with some quite big influencers. Like I think you mentioned that you helped Marcus Rashford with one campaign. I think you mentioned also that there was another campaign that I think you got the Pope involved in. Is that right? Could you
Yes.
maybe, I'd imagine these people are like pretty challenging to get hold of. Would you would you have any advice, if you are a company, like what the best way to sort of get these people on board into your campaign might be, how to sort of engage them appropriately and, get that sort of kicked off?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Finbar, because certainly I had the benefit of the brand behind me, which certainly, there's, I don't think there's an email address or a phone number for the Vatican. There's other ways that, you get in touch, but certainly having a brand behind you helps. And, on a serious note, but I think, first of all, there are all of these incredible, really smart, really, kind of hungry, smaller agencies out there with, with talented people that really understand the space, that have built their business on, on supporting creators and helping creators have, build a career, and work with brands in a safe way and in a professional way. So I think that's certainly one route. I think, it requires some investigation, but they're out there, that, and they're not necessarily the biggest brands that you feel are kind of unattainable. And I think second, I see a lot of brands just going direct, and literally just getting into the DMs and saying, "Listen, we see what you're doing. We love what you're doing. Can we have a chat?" And it starts like that. And I just, it feels a bit maybe odd as a marketer to just engage directly. But again, that's one of the differences between working with a creator versus a celebrity or an
Mm,
influencer. I think they're not closed to that direct approach, and especially if they're a bit of a smaller creator where they might not be represented. That's one way to do that. So I think, don't shy away from that kind of direct approach. And there are there's Instagram was also working on a kind of creator marketplace, because they realized that this was hard. This matchmaking element is something that's challenging, both for on the creator and on the brand side. And so, as a platform business, is that something that they could do to help facilitate? So, see how something like that might evolve.
sure. Yeah, no, I can imagine that being quite useful, really. If you're focused on a particular niche, maybe you could just search by all of the sort of creators within, I don't know, financial advice, for example, and then be able to get sort of a big list of everyone who's sort of focused on that area. That would save a lot of time. Um, cool. So yeah, I mean, I guess, obviously as a marketing director, you know, making the right start in a new role is really important. You've really got to try and make an impact in your first sort of 90 days, within a new organization. Do you have any advice on what people should focus on in that time to really sort of get up and running as quickly as possible?
I do, and even though I spent, more than the past decade, with Meta, I did a lot of different jobs there,
Mm,
and I joined new teams, and so something I tried to do each time that happened was resist the urge to be impulsive and want to make kind of radical or immediate changes. I think as marketers, we're fixers, people, I've even been called the fixer, right? You want to come in and you want to fix things, and you have to really, and you want to introduce some shiny new tools, because we love new tools. And I remember I maybe was in a team in a part of the business where we used X or Y process or tool, and you immediately want to bring that. You want to take your learnings. This is normal. You want to take your learnings and you want to evangelize them. But I think in those early days, you really have to resist the urge and focus instead on the listening part. And I've heard a lot of your guests talk about that, and I think it's the best advice, which is to build the relationships with your internal stakeholders, actually spend time with customers. It's scary how many marketers are not ever out in the field, or they don't sit
mm,
on a sales call. That's wild to me, because that's in my experience the key to success. And so investing in what I call kind of the intake process, right, especially in your early weeks, and resist saying, this is how we did it at my last company, or this is how we did it in my last team. That just builds walls. But investing in those key stakeholder relationships, that has helped me to identify the most critical priorities. I mean, as I talked about marketers wanting to be the fixers, and I think the challenge and another challenge is that our reach can be potentially very vast. We can really sit and support lots of different parts of the business. And while this is great, and I think marketers love this because it makes for a very diverse career, but what's hard is that what you should be doing is focusing on the critical priorities, right? And that the way I've always done that is I align with senior leadership as as high as you can go, align with senior leadership and identify those critical priorities, understand the pain points. Sales teams want to work with marketers that are asking about what the problems are and trying to understand how they can alleviate those pain points. Then you can get to some of those quick wins. I think, by kind of month 2, month 3, then you're starting to achieve some of those quick wins, which honestly might be small things like reducing some friction in a process or even just unblocking issues for your team. So I think it's about having a methodical approach, being an active listener, resisting the urge to be impulsive, and then aligning with senior leadership on what those critical priorities are. And then ultimately, what I've always done is I don't build my plan in a vacuum. I'm using all that time. I build the plan with my senior stakeholders. And then I share that with them. I get their sign off, I get their buy in, and then I share it with their entire team, so that we're all on the same page. So that when we get to kind of month 6 and marketing is pushing out X or Y campaign or initiative, we can map it right back to that plan that we all agreed on. And I think that helps us, have both the quick wins, but build a long term strategy for success, which is really what every marketer wants to do.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I definitely agree with the point of getting, sales involved as part of the discussion is really important. Like you often hear about sort of challenges of integrating marketing with sales. Sales, have their opinions and marketing have theirs, and sometimes they can act in sort of silos, as opposed to working together really, to achieve the same result. Um, no, that makes a lot of sense. I guess in terms of your roles, obviously you mentioned, you were promoted multiple times at Meta. You obviously held several different positions within that organization. So you obviously inherited teams as well as sort of had to hire new people as well within the company. Were there any sort of particular sort of non-negotiable skills or qualities that you looked for when sort of hiring, or you know what was most important for you when sort of building out?
I think it's hard to know at the outset what those skills are. I will give you some more. I do have some kind of go tos in my mind, but really where I always start is back to my previous point, which is the alignment, right? When you align with the business on what success looks like, because it's incredible when you talk to your stakeholders and try to understand what success looks like for them. It can often really vary, and it's your job as the marketing leader to really bring that alignment together, I feel. And it's, is it revenue or is it incremental revenue? What does that mean for a business, right? Is it signups? Is it sentiment? What does success look like for this business in this moment in time? When you know that, you can identify the skills that you need and you can understand where the gaps are in maybe the existing team, right? And so that's where I always start, when you have that alignment and you understand, okay, what are the jobs to be done? Where do we have the gaps? What skills do we need to bring in? But some kind of one of my other real rules of thumb are when I'm hiring is bringing complementary skills into the team versus the temptation to hire a clone. I
Mm,
mean, I think it's fair to say we all, when we talk to someone who looks like us and talks like us and has skills like us, we can relate, right? But I've always resisted that and tried to think about how do I, who's going to be complementary to the folks in the team that are here. And I think this can be really powerful in the sense that it staves off groupthink, right? You've brought in all these different skills, and it helps you pivot more easily when you need to. When you need to kind of pivot direction, when CEO comes and says, "Listen, we're taking this new path." When you have those complementary skills in a team, it really helps you pivot. So I think the only other thing I'd add is I love to talk to marketers who have experienced actual failure, that they have learned from it and they can articulate what they would do differently. And that mindset, I think, has always been incredible in a team, because it's having the failure, but clearly thinking it through and articulating it, how you would do things differently, is a great contribution to any team.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I think, as you mentioned, sort of outcome-based hiring is really important. I mean, often I find that people jump in straight into sort of the requirements and to writing the job description before actually getting everybody in a room just to discuss, what are the actual business outcomes that need to be achieved by hiring this person, whether it's, driving revenue, driving signups, or whatever the key metric that they're looking to achieve is. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. Um, I guess my last question was just around sort of the evolving sort of marketing landscape. Obviously, like this year, we've seen some quite big changes when it comes to all of the new sort of AI tools in the market and how that's sort of disrupting marketing. Are there any other sort of trends or developments that you're seeing within marketing that you think people should be really paying attention to at the moment?
I mean, I think it's a really exciting time in marketing. I think a lot of people talk about the fears and the anxieties around how AI will replace maybe some of the some of the work that we used to do, but actually I see it in the opposite. The advancements in AI and CGI have really led to the use of virtual creators, and of course, I'm going to talk about creators because that is an area that I think is really fascinating, and as I said, really in a growth phase. But these virtual creators, right? So more and more brands are actually experimenting with using them. Now, I don't. It's kind of an interesting space to watch. There's I did some research on a retailer in Brazil. It's actually Brazil's largest retailer, called Magalu, and they've actually created the world's biggest virtual influencer. And her name is Lou, and she started out life like way back in 2003 as this. It was like the in-store voice that they leveraged, and then they worked with Ogilvy in São Paulo, and they turned her into an influencer. Uh, and yeah, she appears on live TV shows. She's in music videos, and she creates content for some of the world's biggest brands. Because right, remember, she's created by the retailer, but really is able to be leveraged by all the brands that they work with. And in 2022, she was like the most followed virtual influencer, with something like more than 14 million fans on Facebook, which is huge in Brazil, 6 million on Instagram, etc., YouTube, Twitter, TikTok. It kind of wild. So this is a space where, again, that's an opportunity for marketers to really have a new idea, and work that into a marketing strategy we couldn't have even conceived of 10 years ago.
Mm.
So I see that there's AI is just creating those opportunities to really think outside the box.
Do people know that she's an actual, like that she's not a real person, or is that like from, I mean, the
It's
people outside the company, or do they just know that she is sort of fake?
I mean, it's a good question because the way they present her to the world is in all sorts of different guises, and really can feel quite, yeah, it can feel actually quite real. So there probably are, I mean, to follow, and you're laughing, Finbar, but yeah, people are following her, but I think maybe it's what do we call it, the suspended disbelief, the
Mm.
same reason that we love watching telly. It's just one of those things we accept as being a bit different. And I think you see, in this case I'm talking about a retailer, but what I also think is fascinating is that the luxury space has really cottoned on to this and are really leaning into virtual influencers. Why? Incredibly brand safe, right? Incredibly brand safe.
Mm,
And luxury was really one of the laggards to adopting social media, but really is really at the forefront of this kind of concept. So watch and see.
yeah, no, it's interesting. I guess if it's a virtual influencer versus a real life influencer, you can sort of like control their every move, whereas maybe like a real one might, cause you some issues perhaps if if they have a particular opinion or something. Um,
Sure. I mean, just need to say two words, Kanye West. I mean, this is, I think we all know, absolutely. Yeah. So it's creating opportunities, but marketers are going to drive that strategy, right? Marketers are creating those opportunities. So AI is only creating kind of new spaces, I think, for us to play in.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing opportunity to just try and test as many new ideas as you can to see what sort of sticks, which I guess is every marketer's sort of dream process, really. It will also be interesting to see if like there's a new sort of set of influencers that live within maybe the metaversal world as well that become, quite big and popular. Um, no, that's really interesting. Cool. Well, listen, Carla, thanks for walking me through all of that advice in terms of, how to build out an effective marketing strategy, best practices when it comes to marketing a first of a kind solution, and also sort of the power of influencer marketing as well. I guess if anyone in our network wanted to get in touch with you, perhaps to discuss any of the things that we've chatted about today, would it be okay if they reached out to you on LinkedIn, or what would be the best way to sort of?
Certainly. Certainly. Definitely. LinkedIn's perfect.
Okay, cool, awesome. Well, thanks for your time, and yeah, great chatting today. Take care.
Thank you, Finbar. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the interesting questions.